The paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
Entitled. You want answers.
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Nick Bryant podcast. My guest today is Jose Lambiet. He was a news columnist, investigative reporter for the Palm Beach Post. He was an executive editor for RadarOnLine. He was a gossip columnist for the Miami Herald. And now he is the president of Palm Beach Research International Private Investigation Agency. He does political opposition research, corporate due diligence, lawsuit preparation, surveillance, electronic sweeps, and countermeasures. So if you're ever in need of any of those measures, Jose is the guy to talk to. How you doing, Jose?
Hey, how are you, Nick? Thanks for having me on.
The reason why I wanted to ask Jose on the show was we were both quote unquote experts on the Epstein case. New York Magazine put together a panel of 6 Epstein experts, and they asked us different questions, and some of us came up with the same answers and some of us came up with different answers. And Jose, how did you you kind of got into investigating Epstein on the ground floor? You were a columnist for the Palm Beach Post at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a few months after I got to the Post in mid 2004, a little bit later than that. Then I started reading, regular stories in the Palm Beach Post about Palm Beach police investigating a multimillionaire. I think at the time people were saying Epstein was a billionaire, but I don't think he ever was. But these stories were starting to pop up, saying that he was recruiting young girls in very blue collar suburbia about 10 miles away from Palm Beach to use basically as sex slaves. So the story was out really in 2005 or so. And what really slayed me at the time is that it didn't feel like anybody cared outside of Palm Beach. This was a total local story that the national press totally ignored. I don't know why. I thought it had all the elements of a great thriller, really. If you make abstractions of victims who are very real, and there was quite a bit of human suffering in the background of the Epstein story. But this was also a sort of whodunit, where authorities and the justice system and the law enforcement system didn't seem to be able to sink their teeth into this guy. And there was a lot of speculation of why at the time. And, I'm not sure we're ever going to find out why, because I don't believe that incompetence was really the reason, but it may have been a part of it. So, at the time, there was a lot of, we were really disappointed at the Post that nobody was picking up on that story, but we stayed with it quite a bit. And what we didn't do is we didn't put it together quite into a comprehensive piece, because this was going on for months and actually years. The Justice Department was investigating him for quite a while, and they were working on this real sweetheart deal with the guy for months. We broke the story that this sweetheart deal would having him in the county jail for just maybe a week at a time, and then he would go and do the weekends, and then he would go to his office to go to work. None of it made sense really at the time, and it still doesn't.
So with Epstein, you heard of all these girls getting molested by this guy, and the national press wasn't interested at all, because I started to look into Epstein in 2010. you were kind of on the ground floor. I was on the probably second story. And what happened with me is I got Epstein's Black Book in 2012, and I came back to New York City where I live, and I tried to sell an article on the Black Book. I mean, I had the Black Book, and I couldn't get anybody to let me write an article about it. Finally, Gawker did in 2015, and I've always thought it ironic because Gawker had like this reputation of being the mean kids in the media. And right. They were the only ones with moral fortitude to actually put this story out there in a big way. And I've always, and it's a shame Gawker was sued into oblivion, but that can often happen.
But you know, these were scary names on the list. And for the media, as you know, and actually from 2005 on, the media were dying. Nobody wanted lawsuits. You know, you're going to say that Dershowitz was a part of this, you're going to get sued. You know, the Clintons, if I remember correctly, Bill Gates may have been flying with. I mean, these were names not to tinker with in the media. And I think that you or anybody else who was reporting on that story were running into those problems where, hey, do we really take a shot at Dershowitz? And then, you know, he's going to be on our back for the next 5 years. We'll never get rid of him. You know, there is some of that. I also think that there was political things where, you know, Epstein had the reputation of being a major Democratic donor who was, you know, very friendly with the Clintons. And I think that carried a lot of weight on why this didn't end up as prominently displayed in the national media as it should have. And actually it took Trump, you know, if you remember, there started being rumors after you did your thing on the agenda, I mean, on the Black Book, you know, Trump's name pops up and Trump is running for office. So now all of a sudden, everybody is interested in this. And I've always wondered, why wasn't anybody interested before that?
I've been investigating child trafficking for 20 years. It's what I do. And Americans pay great lip service to children being the most precious resource. But unfortunately, our government doesn't back that up. And it's really the way that kids slip through the cracks these days is pretty egregious. And but there doesn't seem to be a will to correct that problem.
You know, I talked about this early on in the case with Barry Krischer, who was the state attorney in Palm Beach County and who really let the ball drop. He's the first guy who should be paying for this, and I don't think he ever will. But his reasoning in this, and I'm probably one of the only people who talked to him because nobody else, I don't think he did any interviews beyond what he talked about in 2005 or 2006. You know, I asked him, why didn't you go after this guy with a vengeance? And at the time, the Palm Beach State Attorney's Office reputation was that they never went really hard after rich people because they had dropped the ball earlier on Rush Limbaugh. You know, Rush Limbaugh gets arrested and suspected of not dealing, but you know,
certainly using massive quantities,
95, 100 a day. And you know, he doesn't, I think he got probation or something. Willie Kennedy Smith, 10 years earlier, that was Palm Beach, accused of raping a woman. Nothing ever came out of that. So the reputation of Barry Krischer,
which represented him.
Right. Yeah, there you go. So Barry Krischer's reputation as a long-time state attorney was that he could nail rich people if his life depended on it. And so I asked him, I said, hey, why aren't you going after this guy with a vengeance? He's a nobody who's got money. I know he's involved with some politics, but at the end of the day, who cares? And his response was, I am not sure I can make these girls, the victims, sympathetic to a jury because they got paid. And even if they're 15 or 16, they got paid for sexual favors. Therefore, is a jury going to buy the argument that they're victims instead of hookers? So that was the thinking at the time in that office. And, he may have been right. The jurors at the time, and this is now, going on 15 years, at the time, the jurors may have not looked as, as positively on young girl victims the way they would have done it now, for example. So I think there was some of that in play as well. But then, Barry Krischer's people could have made the girls look sympathetic if they really worked hard on it. And they didn't.
Barry Krischer was the special prosecutor for the grand jury. And let me explain grand juries. A special prosecutor is chosen for a grand jury, and grand jurors are just regular citizens that have shown up for jury duty, and they've been funneled to a grand jury. And the special prosecutor calls the witnesses and shows the grand jurors the evidence that he wants to show. So basically, a special prosecutor is in a perfect spot to completely manipulate grand jurors. And there's a famous quip by a New York judge that said grand jurors or special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. And Absolutely. Here is my problem with Barry Krischer's grand jury. He had 23 victims to choose. I mean, there were statements from 5, and then law enforcement knew of it, another 17 victims, and he only called 1. I mean, to me, that just shows that the fix was in. If he could have called witness after witness, and plus in Florida, if you molest a minor under 18, regardless if you give her $1 million, it's still a crime.
Right. So, absolutely.
So
obviously, the police were really mad at this too, because the police were feeding information to the media, to the Palm Beach Post, all along, and the chief of police at the time was just berserk, and he took the case after Krischer told him, "I don't think we can get, anything going on it." He went to the FBI. He's the one who passed it on to the Justice Department, and so on and so. But the cops were just livid because for once in Palm Beach, and Palm Beach is very much of a concierge police department. I mean, if they catch some of these billionaires, they have 20 of them in Palm Beach, they catch them in a DUI situation, they'll drive the guy home. This is the kind of police department they are. If they catch an outsider in a DUI situation, the outsider gets arrested. So they're sort of a concierge department. And I didn't think they had it in them. But this investigation that they did was perfect. And it just nailed Epstein. They pulled his garbage. They sat on his house in the middle of the night. This was something that this was a labor of love almost for the officers involved. They had done a great job. And so they couldn't believe that this stuff was getting rejected by prosecutors. Hey, we can't do anything with this. And they had 150, 200 pages of dossier that weren't being considered.
Michael Ryder, I talked to him when I first started to cut my teeth on this story in Florida when I was down there in 2012, and he was pretty stunned. And then he had been heavily harassed. He's a real hero in this, Michael Ryder. And
I think so.
And then the detectives, and you're right, they spent a year on this and they put together a solid case, and they had 5 victims that were ready to go, and they had another 17 that they knew about.
Right.
Then all of a sudden there was that corrupt grand jury, and then the feds stepped in to work out a completely odious deal with Jeffrey Epstein by giving everybody by exonerating everyone that was involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Or just kind of amazing. Now, I know that the Palm Beach Post, they played a role in getting that non-prosecution agreement, that very corrupt non-prosecution agreement unsealed. Were you working there when it was unsealed?
I didn't get in that. No, I wasn't there anymore at the time, but they did. You're absolutely correct. They're working there. I think they might still be working on some of the details because the prosecutors, of course, are protecting themselves here. But what we got is basically the details early on of, first of all, there was a dream team of lawyers involved in this, and this was not that long after the O.J. Simpson situation. And so Epstein had Ken Starr, who had just prosecuted the Monica Lewinsky situation. He had Dershowitz, that everybody knows. He had local guys who were the top guys. So this was sort of a dream team of lawyers. And I think the prosecutors were starry-eyed on this and didn't know what to do with it. And, the fact that they agreed to have Epstein go to jail on weekends and after hours, and they would actually drive him with a deputy or two as escorts back to his office in the morning from the jail, was just absolutely bonkers. I got a hold of the list of the guests, quote unquote, that would come and visit Epstein, because actually, even if he only spent hours at a time at the jail, he would get visits from his butler, from one of these, the Russian woman that he had brought in from Russia and was another one of his sex slave, apparently. So he was getting visitations from some of these women that worked for him. And, they were left alone in places at the jail, so nobody would know what they were doing. This was such a sweetheart deal. Nobody, and actually, Epstein spent quite a bit of money on it himself, because the deputies had to be, there were two deputies with him at all times, even when he was in the office. And so he was paying overtime hours to these deputies. So, the sheriff's office made some money on this. And you have to wonder if the money-making scheme here was one of the reasons why they gave him such a sweetheart deal, where everybody was happy. The sheriff's office was getting overtime pay for their guys, paid for by a private citizen, and they got to watch him and make sure he wasn't going to get into any more trouble. But I think he was behind closed doors with people without any supervision while he was supposedly under correction jurisdiction.
And let's emphasize here that this is the Dade County Sheriff's Office. It is not.
No, that's Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. That's Rick Bradshaw, who's still the sheriff and who's been reelected 3 times since that. So the people, I guess, the voters thought that this was an okay situation.
It's and then there was an inquiry that was published last year where it said that the sheriff's department didn't do anything wrong, and that the prosecutors didn't do it. The special prosecutors, Kirshner and his assistant, didn't do anything wrong. It was very much a whitewash of something very, very dirty.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. However, the sheriff's department changed something. At the same time as Epstein, they had a situation where a multimillionaire polo owner in Wellington, which is a little ways from Palm Beach, had a DUI accident and had killed an 18-year-old motorist in the middle of the night. And of course, he was under arrest. He's serving 12 years as we speak, upstate in Florida, maximum security. But for 3 years before that, they let him live at home, again, under supervision of off-duty deputies that this man was paying for. So Epstein was not the only one going through the same thing with the sheriff's office. If you had money in Palm Beach, you could basically do justice a la carte, where you would get these off-duty deputies to escort you home and watch you while you were living at home instead of being in the holding cell. And so after this Epstein situation, after the noise that it made, eventually they stopped doing that. But Nobody paid for this. Why did this go on to start with? Why were rich people allowed to basically serve time at their house? This was crazy.
It's called the best justice money can buy.
Yeah, for sure.
The golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rule.
Well, definitely in Palm Beach, that's for sure.
So you watched this unfold and you kind of had a ringside seat to it all. And what was your, were you utterly disgusted by it or perplexed, or what were you doing?
You know, this was probably the worst miscarriage of justice that I have seen in my lifetime. And I've seen, you know, I've seen, like I said, OJ Simpson, you know, one after the next. But this one was grosser to me because it was more obvious. You know, at one point we were hearing that Epstein was having plane loads of French models brought in from Paris, and some of them were underage. I don't think that was ever investigated, but I know they were coming in. Bill Clinton stayed at his house in Palm Beach. What happened there? Clinton flew on his plane. What happened there? I mean, there's still now, we didn't get to the bottom of this. Even with the scrutiny, even with the suicide, even with Ghislaine Maxwell just getting convicted, we still are not sure of what really happened.
So these questions that New York Magazine asked us, I'm going to
Excuse me.
ask you, and then I'll give my response too. So how significant was Epstein's little black book? And you replied, the black book is very significant just by sheer association. It makes practically every name in it a suspect of sex crimes. And do you want to embellish that?
You know, I think that in addition to the black book, and of course you got to be careful because there are people who might just be calling him for a tip on the stock market, and that had nothing to do with the young girls. You know, the flight manifest, I think, was also sort of a very important document because the people that he would fly on his private jet are likely to be closer to him than some of the people in the black book. But why, you know, why didn't the FBI get 3 agents to sit down for 2 or 3 weeks and call every name in that black book? Why didn't that happen? They didn't even have to find the phone numbers because the phone numbers were sitting right there in the book. You know, God knows what they could have found. And I'm not saying that there is a network of pedophiles, you know, hidden in that black book. I don't know that. But what if there were? And why didn't these people get a call, every single one of them? You know, you can answer these questions. You know, this is Agent Jones from the FBI. Your name is in, you know, this little black book we got. Can we ask you, why do you think, you know, oh, you know, I was Jeffrey's college roommate, and I don't know, he just saved my number from 20 years ago. Okay, end of story. Move on to the next name. I don't think they did that, and that's also pretty crazy to me.
To me, it's obvious. When they,
Yeah.
When they asked me, did Epstein really know all the people in the book? I said, it's very interesting. As soon as people's names come up in Epstein's black book, see how they run. And then I said, Rodriguez circled a bunch of names in the black book who he said had colluded with Epstein, and the FBI called a number of them material witnesses, meaning that they were witnesses integral to the reporting of a crime. And so Alfredo Rodriguez, Epstein's house manager, even circled the names that he said were in cahoots with Epstein as far as his child abuse. And all those circled names were never really, I mean, you don't have to call everybody in the black book, and I'm sure that a lot of them are completely innocent of child abuse, but they should have at least focused on the circled names.
Of course. Yeah. So I'm telling you, so much has been written about this. James Patterson did a book which didn't teach us anything really.
Yes.
There's been books left and right, but we still don't know what happened. So to me, it's a perfect crime because the system circled the wagons around Epstein, and they did it so well that the population 20 years later still doesn't know exactly what happened.
So New York Magazine asked us how close were Epstein and Donald Trump really? And you replied, in Palm Beach, it's clear Epstein had access to Mar-a-Lago, Trump's resort, without being a paying member. And that's something Trump allows for some acquaintances.
Mm-hmm. You know, Trump keeps an eye, or before he was president, I think that once he became president, situation of at Mar-a-Lago changed quite a bit because you still had members, but now you had government officials, you had Secret Service, so you had an influx of a lot of people on the property. But before he was president, Trump personally kept an eye on every single person who was there. And I can tell you this because I was at Mar-a-Lago every weekend while I was working for the Post. And I have been kicked out of Mar-a-Lago several times personally by Trump. Of course, he wouldn't come to the desk and say, get this guy out of here. But his bodyguards would come out and say, hey, Mr. Trump says you can't come in today. Oh, okay. But then
was that because
2 weeks later, what's that?
Was that because you were with the Post?
Because I wrote something he didn't like.
Oh, okay.
Because on that particular day, he had a bug up his behind. Who knows? But I'm telling you that story just to tell you that he kept track of everybody who was at Mar-a-Lago. So he knew when Epstein was there or was not. He definitely knew when Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the daughter of a similar type of a guy, Robert Maxwell, was sort of a Trump, an English Trump. You know, he definitely kept track of who was there. And so the tacit approval by Trump to have Epstein at Mar-a-Lago makes him more than just a mere acquaintance. Now, also don't forget that at least one of the girls may have worked in Mar-a-Lago and worked at the spa, and that one of the girls' dad may have worked in Mar-a-Lago. So there were definitely ties with Mar-a-Lago, and nobody goes to Mar-a-Lago without having ties with Trump.
And then New York Magazine asked us, how close was the relationship to Bill Clinton? Was he just another rich guy was Epstein just another rich guy with a plane? And you responded, in Palm Beach, it's clear Epstein had actually said, you didn't say anything. Sorry about that.
You know, Epstein was a donor. And politicians are whores. We all know that, whether it's Clinton or Barack or Trump, politicians are whores. They'll do anything for money. And the fact that Epstein had money and gave quite a bit of it to Clinton, you know, it's the same thing as Trump and Mar-a-Lago. Clinton knows of Epstein and probably talks to Epstein and flies with Epstein. You know, I like Bill Clinton. I'd like to think, you know, in a higher fashion than this, but you know, the facts are the facts. You know, anything Epstein touches really turns to crap, and therefore, by just the fact that you hang out with him, you should be under scrutiny. And Clinton has not been.
Actually, Epstein was bringing women into the White House when Clinton was president.
I'm sure he was. Yeah. And I think he went in with Ghislaine as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's I'm hoping somebody in government will keep going here, but they won't. You know, the Acosta situation was also, to me, you know, Trump names him to actually a cabinet.
The labor secretary.
Yeah. And so and everybody in South Florida, when Acosta is named, knows that Acosta let Epstein off the hook. And yet he's named to a cabinet a post. And it takes 1.5 years to get him off. Excuse me.
That might have been a tit for tat. Trump naming Acosta. That's initially what I thought, anyway.
I don't think that Trump thinks further than the tip of his nose. And I think, frankly, that Trump forgot or didn't even know Acosta's involvement with Epstein. And of course, nobody in his entourage thought of mentioning it to him and say, hey, Mr. Trump, you may want to think twice about this Acosta situation. It could be as simple as that. I don't think necessarily there was any kind of a payback for anything in the Epstein situation. I think Trump was looking for a Hispanic Miami type to a higher government, and Acosta presents well. He's a smart guy. He did a lot of decent stuff when he was working for the Justice Department in Miami. It's not all bad, but the Epstein situation went out of control, and it was fitting that Acosta had to go. He shouldn't have been even nominated to start with. But like I said, I think they may have been. The U.S. government is collapsing, and it started collapsing with Trump coming in. And I think this is another proof of that. That they're either too stupid or incompetent to figure out that Acosta was too involved with Epstein, yet they nominated him.
So that segues pretty naturally into what New York asked us. Why did Alexander Acosta cut such a lenient plea deal with Jeffrey Epstein? And you replied, I believe Acosta was starstruck by the dream team that Epstein gathered for his defense, guys like Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz. I also believe there was political pressure from above on Acosta to go easy on Epstein. And we shouldn't assume that Acosta was a competent US attorney. I often believe more in incompetence than corruption. So do you stand by that statement?
Yeah, I do. I actually do. I think, both parties, when it comes to Epstein, both parties are to blame. Yet again, where you can't even pick one party over the next, they're both to blame. And this is yet another argument of why there should be 3 or 4 parties in this country. The Republicans are to blame because of the Trump ties to Epstein and not pointing it out. And the Democrats are to blame because they took Epstein's money. And, I do believe that some people in government probably picked up the phone and told Acosta to go easy on the guy. And he was a good soldier, and he did what he was told. I don't think he got paid off. I don't think he had his hand out. This is not that kind of situation, I don't think, with Epstein. It was too serious to start distributing checks to everybody. But I don't think they expected also the situation would get out of control with the Pulitzer series in the Miami Herald, and the light that shined on the Epstein situation after that. It ended up on, if I remember, 48 Hours on CBS, and just about every network did a show on it. And, it sort of got out of control. I don't think that Acosta ever expected that this would happen. But it did, and that's good. But it's not enough.
It's kind of interesting. No one in the mainstream media was really willing to touch this until the Miami Herald wrote that series of articles. And then all of a sudden, open season was declared on Epstein to a certain degree. I mean, there was a lot of the reporting was just digging up salacious dirt. I didn't see a lot of articles that talked about how horrific it is to molest children, and that people should be punished and there should be justice.
There was a lot of hesitation, Nick, from the media all along because of the fact that these had to do with young women. And, the eternal arguments in newsrooms at the time were, do we name these girls? Do we even go and talk to them? Do we try to track them down? Or do we cool it and allow them some privacy?
You found some of these former victims for the Daily Mail?
Yeah, and they all have compelling stories, some of them, I tracked one down who eventually committed suicide. And I'm not saying that she committed suicide because of the Epstein situation, but I think that the spiral, the death spiral that she was in may have started there, continued with drugs, and eventually with a suicide, and her family was pretty open about the Epstein links. I found another one who lived sort of in a ramshackle sort of a house in the suburbs of West Palm Beach, but she had a Mercedes in the driveway. And it was pretty clear that she bought the Mercedes with the money from the Epstein, legal implications.
The lawsuits.
From the lawsuits. There was another one who, was pretty matter of fact about taking the money because she needed it. And she was from a broken home where, $100 that she might get from Epstein was just crazy money for her, So these young ladies all had very compelling stories.
Well, it's amazing. Predators know how to prey, and Epstein was a super predator. And
yes,
he would find their weakness, which is generally lower socioeconomic girls.
Yep.
In need of money.
No, not the greatest student at the high school they were at. Sometimes socially, excised by the rest of the class for some reason. But he didn't get his hands dirty by going out himself. This was being done by associates, by other girls from the high school. There was one high school at Royal Palm Beach High School where many of them came from, and it's from a very blue collar, lower middle class, working class background, and I think that a lot of these women came from that school. At least the ones that I talked to were all from the same school. So
New York Magazine asked us, what about Acosta's reported explanation that Epstein belonged to intelligence? Is it likely that Epstein was a spy? If so, what would his use have been to the intelligence community? And I responded, it's very obvious that Acosta was told to stand down. Who has the power to tell a US attorney to stand down from a child abuse investigation? You've got the attorney general and you've got the president.
right,
Those orders must have come from very high.
right.
And
But
that's why I believe that Epstein was being protected and that he was intelligence. I mean, the blackmail that we can talk about a little bit later, but for a US attorney to be told to stand down from a child investigation, from a child abuse investigation, those orders have to come from very, very high up.
yeah, there's only a couple of people. You're absolutely correct. But, the CIA, the intelligence, what would he have? This was a guy, what would he have to offer? Would he have his people in his black book? Is that who he was ratting out? Was he, was he an FBI informant? And was he helping the FBI keep track of or keep tabs on some of the people who were with him when there was sexual abuse? I think, was he informing on, the British royal family members that he knew? Intelligence I don't think the intelligence community is run by people who recruit other people. Maybe he was an informant, that I would believe, and maybe he was an informant in financial, possible financial crime, because this was his field. This is a guy who knew how to move money, how to make money, how to distribute money, and that I would believe that he may have been informing on that kind of a field. But was he a guy that the CIA would send to Egypt to recruit sources? I don't think so. I don't think he didn't have the personality. It takes a certain personality to be intelligence. You have to go and you have to go and recruit other people. You have to keep your ears open for very subtle things. I'm not sure Epstein had that kind of personality, but
how about providing young girls to these power brokers that wanted young girls, and then blackmailing them? Possible.
Then that makes him an informant. I don't think he was a part of the intelligence community. He may have been informing. Yeah, I believe. Yeah.
Or an asset.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
I wrote a book about a child trafficking network, and it was called the Franklin Scandal, and that's how I got into all this type of stuff. And I found one of the blackmail photographers, and I eventually he started to trust me a little bit. And he was definitely on the unctuous side and a little sociopathic, but I do believe that he did tell me the truth occasionally. But I said, how does this work? Tell me how this works. And he said, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and it's a beautiful yacht, and you can have anything you want on this yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure you drown. Right. So I think Epstein's function was providing the girls for the yacht. That's right. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
And all his homes were fitted with extensive blackmail surveillance equipment too. So he could have been compromising people also.
Yeah. Yep. But that wouldn't make him, that would be, I think there was some international components to that, but it was mostly, US intel, if there was such a thing. And so now it tells, now the question is, we know that the US government is not supposed to spy on their own people. Were they using Epstein to spy on their own people?
That's never stopped intelligence.
I know. No, you're right. You're right. I know.
It's so New York Magazine asked us, was Epstein a blackmailer, either an explicit one or an implicit one? And you said, of course, if you are a well-known man who sleeps with underage girls at a friend's house, you automatically become the friend's bitch. It's an old CIA source recruiting technique back from the Cold War. Still, I'm not sure he would have become as rich as he became blackmailing folks. And my take on that is a little bit different. I think that he could have become richer by blackmailing people.
Maybe.
Because as you said, if he managed to compromise them, they would have been his bitch.
Right. But, I think he was also a legitimate money manager. I was told early on, that he came up with a system, an investment system. And this wouldn't be unusual for somebody mathematically inclined to come up with a way to invest that makes him rich. So don't forget that there was some of that too. The guy was a legitimate investment guru. It probably made him better to have people that he could go to and say, hey, by the way, remember what we did 6 months ago? I would appreciate it if you blah, blah, blah. There was some of that too, I'm sure. But you got to start with a certain base. And I think that he was a legitimate money guy.
I've talked to Maria Farmer, and she had worked for Epstein, and then until Epstein tried to molest her. And she said that Epstein told her that he only had one client, and that was Les Wexner. And if you've got a client like Les Wexner, you don't need any other clients.
That's true. That's true. Wexner's name always was mentioned with Epstein, always. And we didn't get to the bottom of that either. You know, authorities did not get to the bottom of that either. What was that relationship? You know, early on, we were told, or I was told, that the relationship was more than a son and a father. You know, there may have been some other activities involved here. I don't know. But those rumors were out there.
Well, Alfredo Rodriguez circled Wexner's name as someone who was complicit in Epstein's brothel of, underage girls. I hate to use the word brothel. And Virginia Giuffre named Wexner as a perpetrator. So there's double corroboration on Wexner.
Right.
What I have wondered is Wexner being blackmailed or not. And that's a question that I have. Now, I wrote an article on Epstein, and I showed that Les Wexner had big time connections to organized crime, the Genovese crime family. And if Epstein was in fact blackmailing Wexner, Wexner just had to go to his buddies in the Genovese crime family and say, hey, this guy's blackmailing me. I think he needs to be taken out.
Right.
But if Epstein was working for a large an organization like the CIA that said to someone like Wexner, don't touch Jeffrey Epstein or else there'll be retribution. I mean, that's the only way a college dropout from Coney Island can hang out and possibly blackmail some of the richest, most powerful men in the world, is if there's an organization behind him that
or big money, or big money.
Yes.
You know.
And actually, I think it was both.
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
So what have you concluded about Jeffrey Epstein?
That we still don't know the extent of what he did, and we still have no true accomplices outside of Ghislaine Maxwell. And yes, there were, there was the butler, there was the house manager, this guy died, that guy's still around, served a few months. The lower level people, nobody cares really about. But, like Wexner, why hasn't he been talked to, or why isn't he under arrest? Clinton, Trump, this stuff is really the prize. If you are law enforcement, this is really the grand prize. And either law enforcement has become toothless, which is possible, or they're not on purpose, they're not doing their job. But why isn't there more that hasn't come out? My conclusion in this whole thing is that we still don't know what's up, unfortunately, and we'll probably never do.
I interviewed Brad Edwards last week, and he told me that there were just multiple levels of corruption that he had to fight through in order to help these victims.
I'm sure he did.
And I keep going back to Alexander Acosta. As I said, there's only two people that can really tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. And one is the president and one is the attorney general.
Right.
So one of those two, most likely the attorney general, told him to stand down. And think of the power that's involved in that. To have a U.S., to have a attorney general tell a U.S. attorney to stand down when scores of underage girls have been abused. Because that has to cut on someone's conscience. If they have,
you're dealing with people that have no conscience. No, it doesn't grind on anybody's conscience. You know, Acosta doesn't have a conscience. Clinton doesn't have a conscience at this point. I mean, I think you are attributing human conscience on a lot of these people, but they don't. First of all, to have sex with an underage person, you don't have a conscience. Ghislaine Maxwell doesn't. You know, nobody associated with Epstein really does. So I think, you know, you're dealing with a lot of cruel, cold, heartless people, which most of these people are.
so basically, you're kind of delineating a sociopath.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And unfortunately, it seems that there's a lot of upper echelon sociopaths running our country.
Yes. And they get elected by voters who don't know what they're doing. So yes. Yeah. When the voters of this country elect somebody who's been bankrupt 5 times, who went through the systems and couldn't make money and couldn't be a good businessman, but yet the voters think that the guy was, this is just the system is just screwed up, and it will go to the lower level of government. And we are victims. I think the public and the voters, although the voters voted, but they are also victims. And the public in this Epstein situation is really not only you have these women who are victims, but the public is too. And do voters deserve this for voting for the Clintons and voting for Trump and voting for the people who came before him? Yeah. In a democracy, you vote, and then you are in bed with the guy you voted for, and you should go down with him when he goes down. We really deserved, at the end of the day, if you analyze the situation, do we deserve Epstein? Did America deserve Epstein? Yes, it did, because it created Epstein, unfortunately.
Well, the book that I wrote about, it was Republican power brokers pandering underage boys to Republicans. And Epstein was primarily pandering underage girls to Democrats. And I think that's why, because the Republicans had a pretty big card to play with all those Democrats that Epstein was providing underage girls to, but they didn't, because I feel that the Republican ranks are rife with that same type of thing.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Because it's happening on both sides, it's not going to be processed. And I think that there's an intelligence nexus there. I really do. I wrote a book called Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail. I wrote it with Henry Vincent, who ran a gay escort service. And there was a CIA asset, much like Epstein, and this is mid-'80s money, but he was spending $25,000 a month on gay escorts. And he was also having boys flown in from the Midwest, and his house was filled with cameras. clandestine cameras, just like Epstein's. So I think that this is a scenario that keeps repeating itself. And I've been told, and I don't know if this is true or not, I don't know how solid this particular source is, but I've been told that Epstein was actually training an Epstein Jr. To perpetuate it. I mean, I'm sure Epstein didn't know that he was going to die at Metropolitan Correctional Facility, but in New York. But yeah, I've been told that he was. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it does make sense, because I do believe, I've been looking at these type of networks since 2002, and on my podcast thus far, I've looked at 4 large trafficking networks, child abuse networks, and only one of them was acknowledged as a reality, and that was the Epstein trafficking network. So my belief is that you've got a mix of very corrupt politicians, sociopaths, and also intelligence. And I think that that's why, one of the major reasons why America is an empire in decline. Our whole bureaucracy is getting so perfidious that I think that, and I don't know, a government that covers up child molestation is approaching spiritual death. Now, I don't know if we're there already. I hope we're not. I hope we can make a U-turn. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that?
I agree with you 100%. I mean, nothing really, even, nothing gets done. You can get a freedom of information request filled up these days on anything. And so how are you going to find out more about the Epstein situation if you can't even get a simple freedom of information request, which, by the way, this is what reporters do to find information in the government. And, I probably have 3 or 4 outstanding ones right now on diverse topics, and they're not even getting responded to. You have a government that is collapsing on itself when the basic duties of the government are not getting taken care of. The IRS doesn't pay, is not paying the refunds on time. They can't process anything on time. You can't get anybody on the phone from Social Security. This is just craziness. And you can analyze it until tomorrow. We're not getting enough tax revenues, or they're not being spent on the right things, or you can go on like this forever. But yeah, you're right. I think you're absolutely correct. But I think it's further along than you say. And
I'm an optimist.
I'm good for you. I'm European, so I'm a pessimist.
What I see with the Freedom of Information Act is really egregious. So when Epstein died, the New York Times, which is the purveyor of truth in our country, said that the Epstein case was closed. So I sent in a FOIA, and I didn't, because there were a lot of DVDs taken out of Epstein's safe. And I said I didn't want the DVDs. I wanted the reports on the DVDs.
Mm-hmm.
And I was eventually, I eventually received an email saying that they couldn't give it to me because it was an ongoing case.
Of course. You're lucky you even got a response. You should be happy about that. But this was how many years ago?
Actually, they gave me a response pretty quickly. As soon as Epstein died and I read that the case was closed, I filed a FOIA. And
so this is what are we talking, 3 years ago now, or 4 years ago?
Yeah.
If you made the same request now, you wouldn't even get a response.
Yeah, most likely. I've always had problems getting FOIAs. I think that the things that I've FOIA'd are secrets that the government rather keep secrets. So, but hey, the New York Times said the case was closed. So I filed my FOIA. Well, I just want to thank you for being on the Nick Bryant podcast, Jose.
Anytime.
And is there any concluding thoughts that you might have on this?
No, I think we went around the topic pretty well.
Well, I'm going to take away one message from this podcast. The upper crust is a bunch of crumbs held together by dough.
That's a good one. Appreciate it.
And on that positive note, thank you very much, Jose. Have a great night.
Pleasure. You too.
This episode of the Nick Bryant Podcast is sponsored by Surfshark. Using the internet is more dangerous than ever before. Not only does a cyber attack occur every 39 seconds, the government is trying harder and harder to lessen your online freedom. One way you can help deter these factors is by using VPN, Surfshark's virtual private network, to help you feel more secure online, hiding your true location and making it harder to target you. In addition to privacy and safety, it allows you to bypass censorship and restrictions on any website. You can try it for 30 days with a money-back guarantee, as well as receive 83% off with 3 months free using my promo code, Nick Bryant. It's a great way to support the show. So go to surfshark.deals/Nick Bryant and you can feel safer about browsing the web. Thank you.